as was mentioned, I'm a post-baccalaureate student at Loyola. Prior to that, I taught 3 years Greek, Roman, and medieval history at St. Patrick's Episcopal Day School in DC. So my experience has been more on the social studies side of classical studies rather than the language. But my hope is that today that we can begin a conversation using some anecdotes and observations that I had made about how to find ever more joy in classical studies. So, the Library of Alexandria was founded with the goal of attaining 500,000 scrolls by Ptolemy II Philadelphus. It ushered in a new era of scholarship in innovative literary and scientific research. Today, JSTOR holds over 50 million digitized pages of scholarly research, and it's not even within the top 1,000 most visited websites. In the ancient world, scholars had to travel to Alexandria to gain access to the information, but in the modern world, I have access to essentially the entirety of human knowledge in my pocket. This is an incredible transformation. We exist in a world of unprecedented information exchange and one that is increasingly integrated. The rate of change is accelerating, and it makes it hard to know what to expect and what our students will need in the future. I would suggest the observation of the 1983 Presidential Medal of Freedom winner, the philosopher Eric Hoffer, is worth consideration. He said, "In times of change, learners inherit the world, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to handle a world that no longer exists." How we pursue information is changing, and education is shifting along with it. We are starting to recognize that there's been an inversion of traditional education models. It used to be that schools provided a place to find knowledge, but that mandate is becoming eclipsed by rapidly dropping barriers to information access, and that information is taking increasingly rich formats. It's also worth pointing out that we've been very bad at guessing how that information access will change. In 1900, the French did an experiment asking artists to envision 100 years from now what would life look like, and this is what they thought education perhaps might be. So with this shift from information deficit to unprecedented information surplus, we're starting to realign some of the skills that we think students will need. We see an increased push for STEM, pushes for makerspace and project-based learning initiatives. But this change and this shift is just starting to develop, and we are just starting to figure out what that means. We know that it'll be a new era, and we hope that it'll be an era where the supremacy of the carrot will triumph over the stick. Students learn better, it seems, when they're excited and they have sort of positive motives, and quite frankly, we get fewer phone calls if we're using the carrot instead of the stick to motivate. I would also suggest perhaps a polite counterpoint to yesterday's observation that it's better to be feared than loved as an instructor. I think in the short term, you might get better results, but in the long term, as we perhaps try to push to build our students to be learners rather than learned, we might have a more lasting impact. Now, as technology has an increasing role, there's certainly a great deal of trepidation, and conversations I've had with colleagues featured some gloomy long-term predictions where they might be reduced to a substitute teacher who's wheeling in a TV cart, plugging in pre-made modules. They felt that as lesson plans are increasingly turned into videos or sort of pre-made units, they might lose some agency in the classroom. And in the short term, we've all experienced how frustrating it can be to try to relearn a new system, to log grades, feeling like this new program takes twice as long and does half as much. We all know how adding extra technology creates fail points. Smart boards break, blackboards don't. And we know how technology can be an extra distracting factor. I've seen students who would rather bounce a cursor around the screen than do the reading. One time they typed out a whole flag with characters rather than an essay. And certainly we all know that something doesn't format correctly, and that causes the lesson to break down. And if any of you have ever had a Fruit of the Loom underpants commercial pop up when you were trying to show a YouTube video to middle schoolers, you definitely know that technology can derail your lesson. But there are definitely some upsides. The web series Extra Credit described it in the classroom as the potential of a pedagogical force multiplier. And it certainly can free up time for us as teachers, both in the classroom and in our own time. Self-grading quizzes are a godsend. They are fantastic. You can have a quick check of information that the students, if they have it or they don't, and in the morning before you start the class, you can see it's already graded. You don't have to wait till that afternoon to see if they have the lesson down. Google Docs offer a fantastic way for both instructors and students to come together. This was from my Greek class that I'm actually, I was in last semester. The professor would add corrections or answer questions, and all of the students came together to compile our notes and study together, and we could do this from our own homes. This study guide ended up being something like 48 pages, so it was quite comprehensive. I would also like to say that the videos can be a great resource. For me, this was a helpful way to go back and just sort of remind myself about something that I had forgotten. And as the video sort of database expands, students have more opportunities to explore on their own, self-teach, and this is a fantastic new opportunity for us. We are able to offer differentiated instruction at an increasingly accelerated pace. We are able to track students' progress with increasingly detailed metrics. And my favorite element is the ability to employ flipped instruction models, where I could record the lesson the day before, that'd be the class's content, have a self-grading quiz, so when they came the next morning I could be sure that we were all on the same page, and then use that lesson to really drive home why that particular lesson mattered, or use a game where the winning strategy was the mechanic they learned about, so they could feel the advantages, how trade in fact makes everyone richer. Or the game could be used to totally upset that model. For example, we had students who had built their own polis, and they had built their governments, and then we had just learned about the Persian Wars, so they came the next day ready to form a league to drive the Persians out of the Aegean. So in this game, we used candy as a currency, so the students were motivated to maximize their delicious profits. And by setting up a more cost-effective option of sending money instead of troops and ships to the league, they could get more candy. And enough students opted to fund the teacher-controlled Athenian fleet that the game naturally allowed events to mirror the league's actual progress. So, needless to say, when the removal of the treasury from Delos to the Delos desk to the Athenian treasury, which was in my shirt pocket, generated anger, there was an inevitable student revolt, and we used risk mechanics to demonstrate how the Athenian-funded fleet was now overwhelmingly the dominant force in the Aegean. And so as the students' fleets were crushed and they had to pay for their lost fleets with their candy, they learned how callous the utterance was recorded in Thucydides, that the strong do what they will, the weak suffer what they must. And it had an emotional impact that merely reading it would not have carried. And this was made possible because the flipped instruction freed up that class time. So we are emotional beings, and we tie experiences and lessons with strong emotions for a more long-lasting impact. History devoid of meaningful emotions is not but a list of things that dead people did. The lessons learned without empathy contribute nothing to our decision-making. So as technology has bought this new room for us, I would argue that it is also a chance for us to redefine some of what we do. And to use this new time to the best effect, we should reflect on what it is that we're actually trying to do as a classical studies program and as a humanity more generally. Now, I am not a definitive authority, nor can I say there's one answer for the whole field, but the answer that I choose to believe is that the role of humanities is to help us understand what it means to be human, and for classical studies, what that question means through the lens and the experience of antiquity. It is our duty as the keepers of the scrolls of this ancient tradition to keep those lessons alive, and it is a singularly useful set of scrolls. It comes as no surprise that Ajax is being used by veterans to process PTSD, that Trojan Women was used as a way to express what was happening in Syria by Syrian refugees. The distance of antiquity is useful because it also offers a sort of impartial case study. No one gets terribly upset about what Caesar did to the Helvetii 2,000 years ago, but it makes a very important case study for discussing immigration, as does the Romans' failure to incorporate the Goths as they exploited them mercilessly for, well, ultimately ended up being they traded their children into slavery for dead dog carcasses, and that ended up with the sack of Rome. When I was teaching in DC, we had to be very careful with what we said politically. There were active parents on both sides of the aisle, and anything I said could end up with phone calls. So these ancient models offered a way for us to explore those without having me get those angry phone calls. And as we enter this current campaign cycle, it may be worthwhile to reflect on the role of narcissistic political figures who crave media attention and show an inability to think beyond their own immediate self-interests, as shown by Alcibiades. So, it's also worth pointing out that the active choice of our founding fathers to use the Roman and Greek models is extremely relevant for us. The models that they chose all failed. Neither the Republic nor the Athenian democracy lasted, and they imploded cataclysmically. So when we built our system on their models, we built their fail points in, and it is our duty as classicists to make the public understand that if you don't have any check on campaign financing, well then Julius Caesar needs to spend 10 years trying to pay off campaign debts by, well, burning Gaul down for money. So as we sit on this treasure trove of knowledge, we need to think about how we can best reach the world, how to not be a modern day Cassandra and have our lessons go unheard. We must make the larger world hear and care. For as Plato said, knowledge attained by compulsion gains no purchase on the mind. So as I see it, there's a convergence of mandates, both from an educational and a moral standpoint. We must teach the world to care about our lessons that underpin the modern world. Plutarch wrote that understanding is not a vessel to be filled, but firewood to be enkindled, and that a love of learning and a love of truth are what should kindle that. And indeed, enkindling passion in students makes them motivated and self-directed students who will become lifelong learners, who perhaps might inherit the world as described by Eric Hoffer. So, if our goal is to foster engagement and to make students feel good about their intellectual curiosity, we are creating students who will actively pursue our discipline further down the road, who will think back and say, I like Latin, I like history, I was a good student and I enjoyed it. And that sense of agency and that identity that was built in our classrooms will help nudge them in a more classically minded way in the future. So if we can add this mandate explicitly to our educational mission statement, then we can actively structure our classes towards creating the most exciting and engaging experience possible. And it's worth pointing out that classical studies has a delicious advantage in this field. We sit upon the best set of epic, wild, bizarre, humorous, and dramatic figures out of any field. You just don't get these kind of stories outside the classical tradition. And this we can use shamelessly to spice up our lessons. They are the means that we can use to summon renewed interest, and they are the narratives that can drive our lesson plans. As a quick and admittedly self-indulgent exercise, I'm going to give myself 1 minute to list the spiciest anecdotes that would fit into the categories of epic, dramatic, evil, humorous, or odd. A list that will feature events that could go toe-to-toe with fantasy fiction scenarios out of Tolkien or George R.R. Martin. I timed myself before and I cut it off at the 1 minute mark, so I'll see if I can keep that 1 minute limit. So the stories include The Bachelorette winning Chiron by Sisyphus and his 3 hilarious attempts to become the tyrant of Athens, the scheming Alcmeonidae, the snappy retorts of Queen Gorgo, the epic showdowns of the Barcades and the Scipios, the Shakespearean descent into villainy of Crassus, the heroic ordeal of Xenophon and his 10,000, Scaevola and his hand in the fire showdown of Porsenna, the machinations of the Judo-Claudians, and oh god, is there ever a lot of juicy gossip there, the crazy fanaticism of the sports hooligans of the Nike Revolt, the behavior of Julius Caesar during the Kidnapped by Pirates episode, hilariously specific curse tablets, the absurdities of Trimalchio's feast. beast, the bite-dropping speech of Medea, the Attila the Hun, the terrifying scourge of God, the browiness of Mark Antony, the virtues of Cincinnatus Solon, Courage, and Marcus Aurelius, the follies of Admiral Nero and his not-so-thirsty sacred chickens, the barrel of Diogenes, the absurd claims of Procopius' secret histories, the time Theodore shamed a room full of generals and an emperor into manning up, the wildness of Cleopatra, famous Spartan one-liners, how Nicias never learned that reverse psychology is a bad idea, how temples are base, and while you're on base, you're totally untouchable, but Pausanias didn't anticipate that they could break up the openings. Oops. How Chryseis really should have learned to ask more specific questions from oracles, how plague tear apart a city, Mithridates and Rome's 9/11, and centaurs, and why you should never invite them to anything ever, Agamemnon and why good communication is critical to a healthy marriage, Aristagoras is a self-serving jerk who started the Persian Wars, Apollo, Artemis, Niobe, and why people should really have filters. There were more, but we're going to cut it off there. So, we have the right to shamelessly use and pull all of these stories in to make our classes more enriching. And we also have a unique position because classical studies covers more topics than any other discipline. If it touches the ancient world, it's ours. So we get history, theater, athletics, biology, geology, philosophy, economics, and if need be, applied physics in the form of ballistas and catapults, lobbing pineapples across a soccer field. Everyone walks into our classroom with an interest that they already have, and odds are very high that there is a real ancient world counterpart. And by playing on these, by having the student investigate if they love sports, the chariot races, we can pull more interest and more excitement from them, which in turn can be sort of converted into real work. Students who are more excited have higher homework completion rates. And at least in my anecdotal experience, and I would dare say I think you can think of students who also fit in that category. But our adding of extra engagement does not need to begin with an all-in approach. We can start small by offering an extra point on the next test for a student who comes in tomorrow with the best answer of who was ancient Rome's closest equivalent to the Kardashians? Or monsters of mythology have a giant WWE SmackDown tournament, who wins? These were some of the entries from that question. Such prompts, Theoi.com, by the way, has an excellent database of classical monsters, and you see the references there too. So these tools for self-exploration are out there, and by encouraging students to go explore for silly or sort of out there prompts, you can get them to practice that art of sort of self-directed inquiry, which I would argue is a lifelong skill that it is our job to cultivate. This tone can add a bit of fun to the classroom and help students feel a higher sense of agency and feel like they like learning. So another element that we can use technology to kind of pull out this engagement with is gamification. And gamification is an emerging field of study that, in essence, takes the idea of principles of play and converts them into making real-world tasks more engaging.